Today, we're going to be talking about paper, specifically the papers I like to use for my charcoal drawings. Cue intro. As the intro said, we're going to be talking about paper. And I absolutely love paper, and I use lots of different kinds of papers. What you see in front of you are the ones that I'm currently using. Over to the side, you'll see papers that I find at thrift stores, any place like that. Look at like this one here is actually from my wife's grandfather. Who used to be an artist, and he cut a whole bunch of these. We must have 150 sheets of this, and it's a pretty thick paper, but you can see it's kind of yellowed on the outside, and I'm going through these things, and I'm absolutely loving them. I'm loving the size. They're just long and they're all cut the same exact size. So I will use almost any kind of paper as long as it feels like it's a semi-quality, and I know that I can erase on it and scrub on it with a brush without going through it, if you will. But these papers right here are what I tend to use. And you're going to hear me refer to a hot press and a cold press paper. And what we're really talking about is the difference between the fibers of the paper. The hot press tends to be really, really smooth or fairly smooth. The cold press has it's a lot bumpier, if you will. And the difference is that what happens is you get, in the mill, you get this kind of clump of fibers, right? And what they do on a cold press, just like it says cold press, when they push it through the press, the metal ball rollers that are being used are cold, hence cold press. And so because of that, it leaves a nice fibrous texture to the paper. On the other hand, hot press is exactly what it says, hot press. The rollers are actually heated and the fibers are actually heated as well. So when it goes through, it's going through this super hot, and it's also at a pressure. So it's really pushing hard on that paper, and it's going to get a much smoother surface. So those are the differences in the paper. So what I want to talk about next is everybody is, you've put out paper, you've drawn on it, you smear it, and I think that works well to demonstrate the papers, but I really don't want to go that way. I think it's easier to see a piece that's actually working, so you can actually see how does it react to my specific process. My specific process is putting powder charcoal on lightly onto the top, and then using a brush and a kneaded eraser to remove that material to come up before I even start drawing on it. So let's put these away off to the side, and let's grab one to start with. Here is a piece that I am currently working on. And this is done on a cold press watercolor paper. It's a 140 pound acid-free watercolor paper. It definitely has the texture, and you can see it in there. What I've done is I've just used a large brush, put a whole bunch of powder charcoal on there, and now at this point I'm using a brush to remove. And almost everything that you can see has been me using a brush. So I'm going to pick a little space that we can maybe work with a little bit. And let's zoom in. There we go. And let's just say this little area is here. And look how nicely that powder charcoal comes off. I do wipe my brush off a lot on my hands, and I'm looking to get that oil in there. And I'm just trying to pick up a little bit of that charcoal. So you can see that these are the knuckles of the hand. And I'll use a different brush when I want to get some details. So you'll see that it's just like I'm painting. I'm just not using a value. I'm taking away. They call it a subtractive technique. I don't want to get... And you can see this is really a fun paper because it really does leave an interesting texture. And I am playing with those textures. I am pulling from those textures that I'm seeing that are being laid down. And I'm using them to enhance the piece. So at this point, sometimes I'll come in with a kneaded eraser. This one's pretty well used, but I like it because I know it's not going to take up quite as much when I set it down. But look at that. One little hit took down a whole bunch. That's the difference between, because I haven't scrubbed this in yet. I haven't scrubbed. Even though it's a cold press and it's going to take that. As soon as you scrub it in, that's it. So you really got to be careful about when you choose to do that. And you can see even here, it's not coming up quite as easy. And it's okay. I'm good with that. Look at that nice little... Sorry if my hand's shaking a little bit. Just in an awkward position here. And you don't want that dark of a thing. You just touch it with your brush and it'll just pull that charcoal up. I just come in with a brush and I just soften all that up. Just be very patient with it. So you can see how that is starting to come along. I can touch down, look, going after those veins that I love so much. So you can see, as long as you haven't really gone after it and scrubbed this in and this charcoal is just sitting on the top, it's really easy to pull it off. But I think you're going to see it's easy, but not as easy as hot press paper. So you can see how that hand is starting to come together really slowly. But it's starting to come together. And here I am. And you notice I'm also dabbing. I'm not scraping. I do scrape in some of my process, but for the most part, I'm going to start off with the dab because I'm just trying to get some of it off. And I'm letting it build up on the eraser because the more it builds up on the eraser, the less it's actually going to take off. And I'm using that to my advantage. So anyhow, I'm not going to go too far into this, but you can see how this acts. Now, the more I push, the more I scrub, the harder it's going to be to come out. And you can see, I'm going to see if I can zoom into this, that it does have, look at those fibers. Look at the texture that's in there. And I love that texture. I think the texture is really cool. You can see that. It's like, what is that? It's funny, you see things and you go, wait a minute, what is that? I didn't do that. Just look at that. So that line is there. So I have to figure out a way to make that be okay. See that right in there? It's really hard to see at this point, but there's a line in there that's didn't necessarily want, or I didn't intend to have. Let's just say that. So now I have to figure out my workaround. And now it looks just, it's gone after I hit it with a brush. So you'll see it is very much a layering thing. I'm going to go and then I'm going to smear it with this brush. And as you can tell, this brush has been used a lot. And then I'll go back in and with my kneaded eraser, I'll pull it out and then I'll end up mixing it back in just a hair bit. And I'm just looking for those little areas that I can throw a little highlight in, And right now, this cold pressed paper is really, really working for me. Really giving me that texture that is so fun to have. All right, cold pressed paper. Very fun. Cold pressed paper, Fluid 100 cold pressed paper. Don't have to use it, but it's a good price and it works really well. So the next one we're going to pull out here this is hot press. This is going to be the hot press paper. This is the Arches hot press paper. You'll find this to be a little bit more, gotta be a little more careful with this. So I'm not 100% sure exactly where I'm going with this piece, but look how much easier and cleaner the charcoal comes off. Super, super easy. I'm barely touching the paper and it's just coming off. And look how sharp of an edge I can get. This is scrubbed in a little bit more and erased, so I got some texture in there, but it's just super easy to come off. Hot press paper. Zoom in a little bit so you can see that. And now what I can do is super easy. I can go in with my my kneaded eraser, and just tap it. And look how much it comes off. Get those really fine lines if I want to. And then come in with my brush. I can soften it up a little bit if I want to. So I want to push this back a little bit so it looks like that this is going back a little bit more. can do that. Get that sharper line in there, and you see another edge, another piece came out of that, and it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. So I went with it. Much easier to pull out highlights. But as you can see right in this area here where I've done a lot of pushing and smearing, it's done. It's in the fibers. I'm not getting that out. So later on, I'm going to have to either come with a paint or a white charcoal pencil if I want to start adding any kind of highlights in this area. But once again, I'll play off that texture. You can see those little lines in there. And just let yourself flow with that. So in order to get this out, if I put it more white in this area, it'll pull this arm forward a little bit. And look really good. And then I'll probably do highlights a little across the top there. You know, but also you can see I've already done some in these, in the designs on his hooves. So anyhow, and then you come in here where I've already touched. Look at that. If I just touch a little bit, I can get nice little highlights in there. Doosh, doosh, doosh. So I'm not sure what I'm doing with this back. That's why I'm not doing too much here. But I know there's going to be some fur back there. So I'm just going to leave it like that. But hot press paper, it's the charcoal will come off a lot easier because it doesn't get stuck in the pores. That like cold press does is easily. It does, but hot press paper is just a lot easier to pull off of. And so I like to use it too. So just another example of each one has its own characteristics, its own problems. But along with those problems and those hurdles come advantages. And what you got to do is learn how to use those advantages to push you forward and how to not use the disadvantages. So don't rely on those disadvantages. Change your technique a little bit to use what the paper needs, to use the paper's advantages. And so that's the key to this, is that don't get stuck on a specific type of paper. Let yourself wander a little bit. This piece here is a random sheet of paper that I got at Michael's, and I'll go through periodically at Michael's, and I'll just go through their paper bins and see what they have. And if something seems interesting, this kind of has that yellow, and I thought it was cool. I loved this cut. You can't see it. This cut look right here, and I thought that was cool. So it was a large piece, like 24 by 27 or 20 by 27 or something like that. You know, sometimes they're odd sizes, but the charcoal does great. And this is a little smoother, so it's a little bit more like a hot press. And so it's going to act like a hot press. The charcoal is going to come off really easy. And as a matter of fact, you can see down here how a simple touch is going to pull that charcoal right off really, really, really quick. So you got to be really careful with this. But the advantages of that is that you can get some darks and some lights, and you just know as you're going into it what you're going to be using and how you're going to be working. So anyhow, that's just another example. So once again, it's not really about the paper, though you'll find you'll enjoy some papers over other papers. But I find that the artist's journey is exploring and trying different types of papers and having fun with that. And yes, I know some people really they get to one paper, this is the paper I use, they know how it's going to react, they know how their tools are going to react on it, and they take that equation out of their work, and I think that's great. But I don't do that. I do that to a point. I work a lot with Arches hot press, and I work with the fluid cold press. Those are two of my go-to papers. I like those a lot, but I will try other different papers just for fun. And I encourage you to do the same thing. Just try to find those few papers that you really do like. But also just keep exploring and don't get stuck on those. Have some fun. I encourage you, just have a good time. So please like and follow, and tell your friends about the channel if they're artists or even if they're friends that might like to see this kind of stuff. So you guys take care. Bye-bye.